So recently online, I've been noticing like a lot of things going on, but like whether it be with content creators or just like people that I know or just random recommended posts on Facebook, I've noticed that there's just a lot of things that people are going through right now. So, in the spirit of like the whole divine aspect, just because of the fact that I am going to probably be referencing metaphysics a little bit here. Not completely, just a little bit. But I want to talk about healing specifically this week. So without further ado, welcome to this week's episode of Divergence and Divine. My name is WIllspiration, and like I just said, we're going to be talking about the topic of healing this week. So I guess the first thing is like, how does one heal? Because obviously, when you think of healing, it's like, okay, well, if you get hurt, your body's going to heal over time, right? That's natural. But how do you heal? Like, how should I word this? It's like, how do you heal, like, emotionally and, like, mentally, especially, like, when you've been through a lot of stuff? Because obviously, people go through different things. Some people have, parents that were abusive, whether, it was physically, emotionally, or, other things that I probably can't say on YouTube because it's YouTube, or whether that kind of stuff was done by an ex of theirs, whether it be like an ex-husband or an ex-girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever have you. It's always a challenge to heal. I know that a couple of episodes ago, I mentioned my first relationship that I had with my first girlfriend. And I kind of mentioned a little bit about how it was pretty hurtful how I found out that I was the 25th person that she had sex with and only her fifth boyfriend when we were having our little breakup talk. And I still think that it was kind of messed up that she just never specified that from the start. But it was the first time that I had like genuinely been hurt in a relationship. Like it was the first time where I was like, oh, well, this isn't fun. But I remember being just so upset because it's just like, why wouldn't anyone just be honest? Like, and then I remember her being so mad at her because she's like, well, I just didn't want to lead you on. And it's just like, okay, but you just said that like the feelings started dying out like 4 months and we've been dating for 8 months. Like you should have just told me then and there that you just weren't interested in anymore, because technically you did lead me on because you didn't just come out and say, hey, I'm starting to lose feelings. I think we should break up. Because then it's just like, yeah, sure, maybe I would have fought to try to be better, even though I was doing everything that I could to be, a good boyfriend. But at the end of the day, I would have accepted it had, she just said when she was losing feelings. That way it's like, I didn't feel like I was being led on for an additional 4 months before she goes and tells me. But the thing is that over time, you just kind of, it's either you learn to let things go or you just become very, very bitter as time goes on. And this is why I always stress therapy. I always encourage people to see a therapist and do that regularly, like once a week. Sometimes if you need it and your therapist has, availability twice a week. Because at the end of the day, not all of us can just be able to process something and then just like let it go, right? It's not like we can accept it, work through it on our own, and then make sense of everything and be like, oh, okay, now that all makes sense. I'm going to let this go and move on now. It's like, not a lot of humans can actually do that, right? Like, we all kind of need some sort of help in processing what's happened. And I know for me, therapy has been helpful, but also you have to find the right therapist. Because I've had some pretty crappy therapists. Like my first therapist that I was seeing when I was dating my first ex-girlfriend before we broke up, I remember her telling me like I'm just like, and I kid you not when I say this, she literally said that I'm just here for you to vent. Like I am not here to give you advice or anything like that. You're just here to vent and work through things on your own. She was not a social worker. She was an actual therapist, like an actual psychologist. Like, her job is to work with me and help me process stuff, not just sit there. Not me. How should I say this? I'm there to ask her to help me process things, not for her to sit there and do nothing. Like, I'm not paying you to just sit here and let me talk to you. I could do that I have other people in my life that I could just sit there and talk to. Like, I don't need to fucking pay you for this. And then after that, I started seeing a second therapist, and thankfully she's no longer a therapist because she also kind of sucked. She was very gaslighting, and she even had the gall to go and send an email out to a metaphysical store that I like to visit a lot and did not tell me. And I ended up having to confront her about it in my last session with her that I ever did. And I said, that was not okay. I said, you're a therapist. Like, you can't be doing this. Like, you pretty much were like right on the threshold of violating HIPAA by doing that. Like, you can't do that. And yeah, after that, I dropped her as a therapist, which is funny because that same day that was my last session, she also told me that it was also this was her last week as a therapist because she was going to be working as a, like an insurance agent at Blue Cross Blue Shield. So I was like, oh, that's perfect because you suck as a therapist. So it'd be great for you to get out of the field because you're just making people's lives worse. Then I saw another therapist from that same practice, and she wasn't I was about to say psychotic, but I can't really say that my second therapist was psychotic, but she definitely did do things that were not okay. But my third therapist was somewhere in between not helpful at all and like a little bit of gaslighting. But overall, I just didn't really make any growth, I would say, with seeing her. And then now I'm on my fourth therapist, and thank God that my therapist is autistic, and is neurodivergent, because it's made therapy so much easier that I've made more growth in the year and a half that I've been seeing my current therapist than I did in hold on, I gotta count. So I've made more progress in the last year and a half than I did in the 5 years combined seeing my other three previous therapists. So I basically managed to do essentially what should have been 5 years of work in under a year and a half, essentially. Or at least that's the way I process it, because it's like I wasted 5 years and probably only made like maybe a few months worth of growth. Whereas like here, I feel like I've managed to break down a lot more in my life within the second half of my life. So like from basically like 16 to 32. And it's also helped me start to, heal things from my past, from like, my childhood. So it's been so helpful. It's even helped me with like my rejection sensitive dysphoria, which is why I have 2 episodes dedicated to that. So you should check those out. And it just helped me be a better person. And it's also helped me because I'll be honest, there's a lot of us, it's a very common thing, at least from what I've read, from what I've done on my studies, is that it's very common to have emotional dysregulation, if you're on the spectrum or have ADHD, or in my case, both. But it definitely, she has helped me a lot with learning ways to cope with my emotions and stuff. Like, yeah, sure, I get annoyed and I get mad at work and stuff, but at the end of the day, I've learned to just let it go, because it's like I work through it. And if I can't figure it out or can't let it go, then I bring it to therapy, and then we work on it, and then we let it go. And then I'm starting to learn those different techniques, those different coping skills, those tools. And like my therapist told me, the goal of therapy is to get you to a point where you don't need therapy anymore. But she also agreed with my point of view that it's like, but still having a therapist is good because there's going to be times where it's like, man, I wish I was in therapy still. And there might be times where you still need a therapist for something because all of the coping skills and all the tools and strategies that you get may not help you in certain situations. So she liked the idea of getting me down to only having to see her like once a month or even twice a month rather than like every week. And then that way it's like when I absolutely need to, I have my guaranteed 1 month, like my one session a month, and then I can schedule a second one if I need to, and then just guaranteed one slot for a month, like for every month, and then just schedule appointments as needed for the other 3 weeks if I feel like I need it rather than having it be weekly. And I like that idea. That's a really good idea. So I feel like we're definitely getting to that point where I might feel comfortable about doing it like every other week. So like going twice a month instead of every week. But I'm not quite there yet. So we're still working on it, but I'm definitely a lot closer than I was like even 6 months ago. So that's pretty good. But going back to like, other stuff in terms of healing is that the biggest thing, and especially when it involves trauma, is that like, I feel like with trauma, it's always going to be there. Like when people hurt you that bad to inflict trauma, your brain is always going to try to protect you. So you're always going to, something that reminds you of something in the past that gave you trauma will immediately trigger a trauma response, right? But therapy can also help with essentially knowing when you have a trauma response and having the tools to be like, okay, I can get through this. I'm fine. It's just a flashback to something that happened in the past that's not happening right now. I am okay. I am safe. And, obviously, the more complex the trauma is, the harder it is to be able to just stop yourself from having a panic attack from a trauma response. Trauma's not fun. Trauma is very scary, and it's something that kind of stays with you. And, for some people, depending on the complexity of the trauma, sometimes they can heal the trauma all the way. But in most cases, trauma is here to stay the rest of your life. And it's just a matter of, knowing when those trauma responses kick in and knowing when to be like, okay, just because this feels like something that happened in the past doesn't mean that it's going to happen. So whether it be like a physical response or an emotional response, there's many ways to cope with it. And this kind of brings me to my next point of, I think the biggest thing about healing is having to accept what has happened to you and the pain that others have caused you. And also knowing that like 99% of the time that when people hurt you, at least bad people anyway, when the bad people in your life hurt you, they do not feel sorry for you. They actively hurt you on purpose. And when they say that, when they ask you to forgive them and they say that they're sorry, they're not. They're just, they're literally trying to get you to forgive them so they can keep using you and abusing you. And it's not right. And I feel like the worst thing is just like, if somebody is a master manipulator, they're so good at doing it that you want to give them a second chance. And then they take off the mask and they're like, surprise, I haven't changed. And then they put on the mask again. And sometimes some people get so caught up and just so, I wouldn't say brainwashed, but manipulated that anytime that mask comes off, those people will often see it as like, oh, it's like an emotional response. Like, oh, maybe I did something wrong. Maybe they're having a bad day, rather than, no, this person is a horrible person and I need to get away from them like now. And I feel like that's just pretty much what a lot of this is just, I feel like the people that get hurt the most are the people that are kind-hearted and genuine. And a lot of us either continue to hold space in our hearts and we continue to be loving and hold our light. And then there's some of us that just become so broken and bitter that we hate the world. We hate everyone. We don't trust anybody at all. And I'll give you an example of like, I've given plenty of examples of like me and my healing journey, because a lot of what I'm sharing on this podcast is stuff that I've learned throughout my healing journey. So that's a little fun fact. A lot of the stuff that I talk about in my podcast comes from my lived experience and my healing journey as an autistic ADHDer. But I'll give you an example of what not healing looks like. So I've mentioned this a couple times in other episodes where, at my last job, there was a lady that was there, and she wasn't very, nice, even though she seemed like she was. So without going into too much detail, to avoid certain situations, and I mentioned this about my last job and being under an NDA that they forced me under because I, wasn't happy with what was going on and how they were treating me. So basically they said, here's some hush money, sign this NDA and you're good to go. So basically it was in regards to this situation, which, I'm going to keep this because this isn't a situation that was just like work related. It also was like outside of work. So technically it is kind of a public knowledge kind of thing anyway. So it's technically not violating anything. But this lady at my last job, she was, at least she seemed really nice. She was very friendly, talkative, super cool. And, I was just like, okay. Now, mind you, my intuition was telling me, no, don't trust her. But the other thing is, too, is I had just came out of a relationship. So, like, for me, I was still reeling from that. So I just saw, so my brain just goes, oh, pretty woman, a little older than me. So she's obviously more mature than me. She's more reliable. She's not going to play games, that kind of thing. So I, was like, oh, okay. So as time goes on, I'm talking to her more. Trying to try to befriend her and everything. And we became acquaintances. We went from coworkers to acquaintances. We exchanged Facebook information. We messaged each other on Facebook from time to time. And she would always tell me like, oh, you can talk to me about anything. If you ever need a vent, just, shoot me a message. And as we all know, as I mentioned before earlier in this episode, and because like I said, I have 2 episodes dedicated to it, I have RSD. I did not know that I had RSD. So when I would vent to her a lot, it was about my RSD making me think that people hated me and that I wasn't good enough and that I always managed to piss someone off somehow because I'm just weird. And that was also before I was diagnosed with autism and ADHD. So I didn't even know that I was neurodivergent. And even after I wasn't diagnosed, I thought that it was because of my neurodivergence that I was upsetting people. So what ended up happening was I vented to her one time. And then she listened to me. She gave me words of encouragement. I vented to her a second time, like a month later, and she just kind of kept it a little bit short. And then the third time I vented to her, she completely went off on me. And she's like, I can't handle this negative talk. Like, I have my own problems. I can't be helping you. I got, and then proceeded to list all of her problems. And then says that I can't stand negative people. Like, I only want positivity in my life. And if you can't do that, then I'm going to have to block you. And then she didn't even, if I remember correctly, I responded with, asking her like why she would block me, because she told me that I could vent to her and that I trusted her and that I'm opening up to her. And now she's, throwing it back in my face like, no, you can't. I don't know why you thought you could, but don't do it again. She didn't even respond. She just blocked me. And then in person, she told me, she's like, look, I'm sorry I had to block you, but I needed to do it for my own peace. I can't handle negative talk. I have way too much stuff going on in my life that I need to, I can't. Like, if you can't be positive, don't talk to me. All right. I'm going to pause my story here for a second and tell you, first of all, that is toxic. That's what we call toxic positivity, is when somebody is forcing you to be positive, like, or you can't talk to them. That is called toxic positivity. because basically you are suppressing all of your negative emotions and you're telling other people to suppress their negative emotions and to just suck it up and just keep going on with life rather than facing it and trying to heal from it. So then later on, as time goes on, I find out, she's divorced. She's been divorced for 10 years. Her ex-husband was a piece of shit. I'm pretty sure just by all the little, hints and everything she was dropping that her ex-husband was abusive towards her in multiple ways. And it was just, it kind of made sense. Okay, well, now I know why. Like, it makes sense. She's scraping by financially. She's got 3 kids. All 3 of her kids are in sports. She has to deal, like, 2 of her 3 kids are from her ex-husband, so she's got to deal with him, and he's an asshole. And she always mentioned how he was, like, immature. He was also, like, I think, like, 15 to 18 years older than her. So, like, he was already in his 50s, and she was in her late 30s at the time. So I remember that also being something that she talked about a lot. And then I was like, oh, okay, well, it makes sense now, right? Like, I can understand why. But it wasn't until, like, it got to the point where she had just broken up with her, and I'm going to censor this out, but with her fuck buddy, who was someone that worked with us. And then he, like, all of a sudden, like, because he wasn't there, he got fired because he called out our supervisor for being a piece of shit, which he was. And my supervisor had him fired. So, and then after that, a month later, after he, dude got fired, she was like, oh yeah, I broke up with him. He was too childish and immature. But it wasn't that he was childish or immature. It's the fact that he finally got to the point where he actually wanted to date her. And I know that I've mentioned this before, and I think I even mentioned it either in last week's episode or like the episode from 2 weeks ago, how dating culture seems to be, you go from friends with benefits, or AKA fuck buddies, to the actual relationship. Like, it's fuck first, ask questions later, which is wrong, by the way. That is not how you build genuine connections. So don't do that. But then she started becoming friendly with me, right? So all of a sudden I was like, well, I do like you. You're pretty. Am I finally going to get to date you? Is this it? Like, is this the moment that I've been waiting for? And then all of a sudden it was like on and off, on and off, on and off, like hot and cold, hot and cold, hot and cold. And I was like, okay, so maybe she's just, dealing with a lot of stuff. And then she unblocked me on Facebook after a year. And so we were talking. Then she opened up to me about how she's, how she does drugs, how, like, occasionally she'll snort coke, and how she likes to pop Adderall and, for energy, because she needs the energy to keep up with her kids. And she drinks like 3 Red Bulls a day, and like that massive amount of caffeine doesn't do anything for her anymore. And it's like, okay, so that was the first red flag. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, it's not that bad. I mean, she said that she stopped snorting coke, so that's good, right? Like, I mean, the Adderall thing kind of concerns me, but like, it's not as bad, right? And then it's like, okay. So I kind of just looked past it, because you know what? Maybe she is, doing her best to not do drugs, right? Maybe she used to be a drug addict too, and then she's kind of starting to relapse a little bit, and she's just kind of like, no, I can do this. So I gave her the benefit of the doubt. Well, lo and behold, when I finally got to that point where I was like comfortable with her, and I was going to ask if we could start, doing things like, hugging and, that kind of stuff. And I remember that all of a sudden my intuition just started screaming, don't do it, don't trust her. And I thought, oh, it's my anxiety. It's fine. And then I couldn't do it. And then I ended up having a meltdown, because I had this conflicting thought of, is it my anxiety or is it my intuition? And then she just kind of ended up, from there, I can't talk about the rest of what happened, because the rest of what happened was at work, and that's part of like me signing the NDA is like, I can't disclose what happened. The only thing I can tell you is that from there, everything that happened at work happened in front of management, and then there was just, it just kind of went south from there. The only thing I can tell you is that nothing was found against me, but the way I was treated after the fact was terrible. So, and basically when I did stand up for myself, that's why I was given the hush money and had to sign an NDA in order to get the hush money. But I'm just saying, if I had the money at that time, because I was struggling financially, I would have sued. And the only reason why I didn't was because I didn't feel like I was confident enough to win. But yeah, that's pretty much all I can disclose. But I remember there was also one time where she told me over Facebook Messenger how she's like, I don't like the fact that you're blaming me for all your meltdowns, and I'm always the problem, and it's always me that's making you feel this way, and it's not right. I haven't done anything wrong to you. But meanwhile, she was very manipulative and she was very gaslighting. And it's funny because all the guys at work could talk dirty to her, talk about how, how sexy she is, how hot she is. One guy always had the fucking balls to go up to her and be like, so when are you and I going to sleep together? And, he would call her baby, and, and he'd call her sexy and beautiful. And it's just like, and she would laugh it off. Meanwhile, like, then there's me who's like genuine and wants, to be friends and see if it goes somewhere. And I just immediately, that's a problem. But, dude that's pretty much the same age as her ex-husband is over here being a pig, and she's okay with it. And it's like, but the reason why I bring that up is because that is pretty much an example of refusing to heal. And it's refusing to heal because, there's toxic positivity. There is the fact that she's become very bitter, very manipulative. She uses her looks to her advantage, and she basically controls the situation. She controls every friendship, controls every relationship, controls every friends with benefits that she has. Like, she has to be in control. That is what happens when somebody who is kind and gentle and caring gets broken and decides that they don't want to heal. They become bitter and they become not very nice people. And to be fair, it makes sense, right? If you don't heal, you become bitter, you hate everyone, you need to be in control to feel safe. And it's a valid reason to end up like that. But at the end of the day, you hurting other people is not right, because just because you were hurt and you didn't seek out healing doesn't give you the right to hurt other people and be like, well, they're not, they're useless to me. I'm going to make sure that they, that they don't bother me ever again. It's like, okay, but that's not healing. That's just running away from your problems. Like, someone shines bright and wants to help you and wants a genuine connection with you, and you just immediately push them away. Meanwhile, you got somebody that's a complete pig, and they're talking to you the way that you were probably talked to in your last relationship, and that's fine, and again, traumas are very complex, so that could also play another factor into it too, is that like maybe that's just like a trauma response to just accept it and joke around with it. But I don't know what's going on in her head. The only thing I know is that I got played. And had it not been for my therapist, I don't think I would have ever healed from that. And also the friend that I made at work. I mean, I've made a small handful of friends at work. But one in particular, and I remember telling her this, that there were a couple of similarities visually, as well as like in her life, to this lady at my previous job that I just, was just talking about as, to use for this example. And had it not been for my friend, I don't think I would have had, like, I would still be working on getting over this. But between my friend and like getting to know my friend and going from coworkers to like, good friends and working on it in therapy, I don't think I would have gotten over it, because honestly, when I told my therapist about it, she even said that it sounds like this lady from your last job ended up giving you some sort of trauma, because it sounds like a lot of your RSD is a trauma response, not so much the RSD itself, but the RSD then reminds you of this lady, and then it triggers a trauma response. So she inadvertently ended up giving me trauma. So I'm working on it, and I'm glad that I noticed it sooner, because I feel like I can work through it and manage it. Because I don't know if my trauma is like PTSD level worthy, but it's definitely a trauma response for sure. But that's something I'll have to ask my therapist about. But yeah, so the trauma response is tied to the RSD. So whenever I have RSD, then I have like those trauma responses. But I'm really thankful for my friend for showing me that just because someone has some similarities to someone that hurt you in your, in your past, doesn't mean that that person is going to be exactly the same way. So for me, I've just kind of learned to heal from a lot of things. And it's great because, like, for me, the kind of person that I am is I am a genuine person. I like helping people. I like, seeing people smile, not because I want to shut down any sort of negativity just so that I don't have to deal with it, but rather it's kind of like the whole like yin and yang thing where there's darkness and light, light and dark, and you have to face your negative emotions, and you like that's part of healing is making peace with your shadow. Like your past, your darkness, and then your light and your kind-heartedness are two sides of the same coin. You have to learn to work in harmony with your shadow self. And the more you continue to heal, the more you continue to work through things, the more you're essentially doing, what in metaphysics is called, shadow work. You're working on healing, yourself and learning that, hey, it's okay if I still feel like I hate this person for hurting me. It's okay that I'm still mad at them. But at the same time, I also know that at the end, it's either because that's just who they are as a person, or they themselves just refused to heal because they didn't believe that they could ever heal from something so damaging. And so they gave up and became bitter. And for me, that's not who I am. I'm going to prove that you can heal. And if you put in the work, that even if you do still have trauma responses, like you can still manage them. You can still accept the fact that, hey, this trauma is going to be in my life forever. It's never going to go away. But that doesn't mean that it has to control me. And when you start to learn that, then you start to let go of things, and you start to learn to accept things. You learn to accept that it's always going to be a part of you. And that was one of the things that really helped me with accepting being neurodivergent, was like, the more I accepted that, like, hey, my meltdowns are going to be inevitable if I do certain things. Like, I can just guarantee you I'm going to have a meltdown. So what do? I either avoid whatever gives me a meltdown completely, or if it's something that I can do, as long as I can do it at my own pace, then I'll do it at my own pace to avoid a meltdown. And that helped me accept the fact that meltdowns are going to be a part of me forever. There are going to be things that are going to overwhelm me, and my brain is just going to go boop. It's just going to insert like Windows XP powering down effect. Yeah. My brain is just going to do that like the rest of my life. Like, I can't change that. So that helped me accept that too, that like, that's just how I am. Unfortunately, it sucks, but you know what? I'm grateful for a lot of things. And part of healing was doing this like life coaching program with my Reiki teacher, and just the gratitude assignment that she gave me really helped, where every day you list 10 things that you're grateful for, and you can't use the same thing twice. So like, once you write it down, that's the only time you can write it down. So it really starts to challenge you. Like, it's so weird because like you think of the most obvious things, like, oh, I have a roof over my head, I have a car, I have a job, I have money, I have family, and I have friends. And then you kind of, once you get through that, then all of a sudden you're like, oh, this is hard. Like, now what do I do? And then I kind of started getting creative. If I got stumped, I would be like, I can't think of anything. Like, I've listed everything. And then she would give me like little hints. And it's just like, then I would start being, I'd start writing down things I was grateful for. Like, I'm grateful for, food in general. Like what food specifically? Well, I love grapes. I love apples. I love bananas. I love mango. I love eggs. I love pizza. I love hamburgers. So then it's just like, I'm grateful for those foods. And then you start thinking about it more and more of like just the tiniest little things that you don't really think about. Like, I'm grateful for my PC, for my mic, for my printer, for my TV. I'm grateful for my clothes. I'm grateful for, being able to do this podcast. I'm grateful for the people that I've met in my life, the ones that have taught me, both good and bad. And it's just like, that really helps a lot too, because now, you're learning to open your heart more. And then she also gave me an exercise where if like someone pisses me off, I just, you let out your anger, but as you're letting it out, you also wish positivity on that person. Like, it's like, I wish so and so would just understand that, I'm doing my best. I wish that so and so would understand that I'm not faking my autism. I wish so and so would understand that this is a genuine struggle for me and would actually have a heart. I wish that so and so would, be more positive and open and kind. I wish that, so and so would be, less of a jerk. And as you let out your negativity, you follow it up with something positive. Like, by saying that you wish this person would understand, you're effectively, what you're doing is you are saying, this person is pissing me off, but I'm not going to let my anger take control. I'm just going to vent it out and wish them positivity as I'm venting. And that helped so much. So that made a huge difference in my life. So with that, I'm going to end this week's episode because I'm already at 40 minutes, so I don't want to make it super long. So as always, if you guys enjoyed, make sure you leave a like, hit the subscribe button, and hit the notification bell because that will let you know whenever I upload a new episode of the podcast. And with that, I'm going to get editing, and I'm going to have this up later today because it's Friday. So once again, I kind of let the week get by me, so I got to get this done and uploaded before I go to work tomorrow. So yeah, I hope you guys all have a good weekend and a good start to your next week. And I will see you next Thursday or Friday. So most likely Friday because I've been getting kind of, distracted with other things in life. But hopefully next Thursday. I try to usually do these on Thursdays. But with that, I'm out of here and I will see you guys next week. Bye-bye.